And welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne, and this is where I give you my off-the-cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing, data, and philosophy. This week, I'm talking about data strategy and whether it exists or not. Now, I'm probably going to surprise a lot of you as a data strategist and say I don't think that there's such a thing as data strategy. I think that there is only business strategy and data that informs it. But maybe I shouldn't say that because maybe I just made myself unemployed. What will become of me? So no, I believe that there's business strategy and there's the data job is to inform and to improve their business strategy. And that data doesn't necessarily need its own strategy. There's some tactics about how you go about embedding it in your business and all of that kind of thing. But more or less every company I know goes to the same routes from 0 to 100 in terms of data. There's not such a variation in how you achieve that thing that I could consider it a strategy, and some people might disagree with me, but that's fine. So in terms of data laddering up to business strategy, it presents a number of problems. So the first thing is really the biggest problem, which is that data people tend not to be business people. By which I mean that in order to be good at data, you need to know a very specific set of skills. You need to know how to code, how to model, how to translate concepts into ones and zeros, really. And so that requires a lot of time and effort and skill and application. And in doing so, it's not necessarily true that those same people will then also know business inside and out. And they're not going to know necessarily, I've talked about this before, but sometimes the problem with data people is that they don't understand the very concepts and processes that their data is trying to improve. And it creates a real gap where data doesn't have value and it doesn't add to the business because they don't truly understand what they're trying to accomplish. Now, you might say, Oliver, that's an easily solved problem because I've got SMEs, I've got subject matter experts who can help the data people to come to that. And yeah, sometimes those people work really nicely together, but I also think it's sometimes difficult for SMEs to translate what they do, which is nuanced and grey and involves a lot of brain power and decision making, into ones and zeros and automation. Those two things don't necessarily go together super well. And so there's always a bit of a gap in my mind between data people and business people. And I would hope and expect to see in the next couple of years that more business people will start to make the transition where they can learn about the processes of data. They can learn SQL and Python and all those kinds of things. I think it's already happening. And we'll get more people who transition in the same way that I did from marketing to data, because I can tell you with the fact that whenever there's a marketing analytics project, I just know a lot of stuff off the top of my head from having 10 years of experience doing marketing and knowing what the data is showing me. So the second problem is that companies are not really viewing data as a strategic asset today. Bernard Marr said that companies that view data as a strategic asset are the ones that will survive and thrive, but that doesn't really happen today. And the reason it doesn't happen is that where does data normally start? It starts is reporting. And I think most people, quite understandably, they see reporting as a bit of a painful process. It's normally manual, something that you're just basically doing to justify your own job and justify your own decisions, something that happens days and weeks and months sometimes after the effect, that you only know, hey, how did we do financially? Well, let's find out every quarter as opposed to every week and all of this kind of stuff. And so reporting doesn't seem to add a lot of value to the business necessarily. It's a reflection on performance that happens afterwards. And even though most of us can understand that if you shorten the gap in which you are reacting to things a lot quicker, you can have a positive impact, you can close the gap, you can make better decisions, you can pivot easily, it's still that reporting is seen more as a back room sort of innovation rather than something that is going to drive the business. And that creates a problem in which people are not necessarily used to looking at data on a day-to-day basis and making informed decisions on it. And sometimes most of us understand the reasons that you have to wait a little bit of time to see what happens with the data, wait a few days, and then if there's a trend, then you act on it. So even though you might have dashboards and you've invested in centralized data, you're not really seeing any value in the day-to-day decisions that you're making. Now, the reason that you can transition from that is that the real value from data when you get into it is to go beyond reporting and go beyond dashboards. And what you start to do is you start to use this model data from different sources, and you start to apply it so that you get, one source of truth on attribution. I was looking at somebody's ads campaign this week, and Google told them that they were making like a 40% return on ads. And in actuality, they were making 75% because we had the real data from their back end. And so that's great for their marketing team. It shows that the efforts that they're putting in are making an impact. And it also shows them that, hey, actually, I don't need to keep putting so much money into this data source. It is having the impact that I want it to have. But you only get that when you overlap data from different sources. And so that's one part of value, is getting a real truth behind all the different silos that you see on a day-to-day basis. But beyond reporting, really the value is in automation and activation. So when you've got that model data that shows you lifetime value, when you've got the data that overlaps several different things, you can then plug it into automated systems that say, hey, if Emily does these 7 things, then maybe she's going to churn. And so we need to put her onto this list to get people back, to win back her, to make sure she doesn't leave, because we know that acquiring customers costs a lot more than retaining them. And so that's where it can have a real value to your business, because all of those things can happen automatically quite easily. It's a decision tree. It's quite easy to implement. It's, most internal communication systems have some layer of automation. And the problem is that today, the way that that's being done is based on black box systems and number crunching. That system, like HubSpot, will apply some sort of lead scoring or some sort of return on investment that is applied to everybody. So it's just a really standard numbers. It's not bespoke to your business. We were looking at Klaviyo this week, and it literally just gave everybody the same lifetime value. Every single person was apparently going to spend exactly the same. That's not true. And so by modeling your data in a different system and then sending it back through reverse ETL to the systems that your teams are using, you can have a lot of value there, because things can happen automatically. And then the people can still make decisions on edge cases, and also where somebody is really high value, they can then look through their data and see all of their things that they've been doing and thinking, hey, this is a really valuable customer to us. I'm going to give my time to the 100 people who are high value as opposed to the 1,000 people that maybe aren't that. And so the real value that you can get from data comes from doing that. And that's where data can start to inform business processes a lot more. I think the best use case in terms of how data people can transition from being number crunchers, from being back office functions, is finance. Finance has already gone down this path, and we should look to them as how they've done that. So, traditionally finance was a back office function. They were bean counters. They were recording transactions, producing these sort of statutory reports, and controlling costs. And that's why they had that label as the bean counter. But today, finance is seen as somebody who is made to look at growth, made to, how can we grow the company? How can we use the data that's available to us, not just to record what's happened, but to plan a path forward? And they've been embedded within business units, advising on pricing, investments, performance, because they've got historical data, and they can also see trends a lot clearer. So that's a really good use case in my mind of where finance teams have sort of sat at that intersection of operational and commercial data, and it positions them and sort of FP&A teams to provide insights and not just numbers as to how to run and grow the companies. And I think the route from finance people to becoming founders and CEOs is quite a common route, because they know the numbers, they know how the business works on a day-to-day basis, they know the underlying trends that need to happen. Sometimes in my experience, that finance people who become founders, they tend to be a little bit risk averse, and so sometimes they can stall growth because they're looking at numbers too much in black and white, and they're not willing to sort of go beyond that. But that's, I guess, a different topic. So my thought of the week is just really that I don't think that there is data strategy or AI strategy. I think the routes to impacting business and making sure that you have ROI from data are the same. Really, it's by, first of all, understanding the processes that you're affecting as much as humanly possible. Second is making sure you have clear outcomes and what the business wants to see, and not just, hey, we want to double business. Cool. Well, how are you going to do that? What's important to track? And sometimes it's about uncovering the one attribute that is going to make a real difference, which is not always obvious, but it will be hidden in the data. Quite often it's something that is nonsensical. So a good example of this would be Wix. Wix discovered that the number one use case for new customers coming in is when they buy a house, which makes perfect sense, right? but they don't have that data. And so they teamed up with one of the house buying people, I forget which one, so that Zoopla, I think it was, so that they can share the data that, hey, these people have recently bought a house, or they're starting to look at a house, advertise to them at this stage because they've already put an offer in. And so it made a lot more sense for them to come earlier in that journey, and they had a really good use case in making that journey as efficient as possible, so that when they got people in the ladder, they could upsell them Wix basically. And it makes a lot of common sense, but that data wasn't fed in operationally. They didn't know that. They knew few heuristics that this is a thing that makes common sense, but they didn't necessarily have that data, so they were able to team up with somebody who did. And I think a lot of data in terms of data strategy is really figuring out what is going to push the needle, what is the thing that really makes a difference. We have a business that is a pet supplement business, and they've got some decent understanding of when people come to them for when it's an emergency, like, oh my God, the vet is £1,000 and I just need to find a solution to this. Maybe trying these supplements will help. It's going to be a lot cheaper. I'll just try anything at this point. Versus those people who want to subscribe and help the pet over a long period of time. Those are two segments that they know have different use cases and messaging. And so it's a key question is, how can I figure out which is one and which is the other? And then the other thing that made a real big difference was the most obvious thing, which is how many dogs do they have? That's going to 2 or 3x your profit from that person. And so they didn't have that data. It wasn't in their process. So adding that into their process really made a difference on how data can impact profit. And in terms of data strategy or AI strategy, it's really the same thing. It's how can I make sure that my data is closely aligned to the business units I am in, and make sure that my data team aren't spending all the time on ad hoc queries, because SQL, ad hoc SQL is not good. It costs money. Making sure that 90% of the questions that they need to ask on a day-to-day basis are set in the dashboard, that they're not having to ask those questions again and again and again. And that then my data team can do deep dive into the complicated questions that have multiple variables in them that really make a difference to uncover those nuggets of advice. So those have been my thoughts on why I don't think that data strategy is really a thing. I think all of data strategy should be laddered up to business strategy and making sure that data makes an impact, and that financial people have already gone down this route, and we need to really follow them and learn from them. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next week for another Gin for Gwyn.